Distinguished colleagues, thanks for coming, for joining, thanks for attending this press conference dedicated to the presentation of a book is in English, but the Ukrainian translation is ready. The land of a country of missing people. It echoes the massive tragedy, and it also is a product of the endeavor by the International Commission, and it is to provide the readership with a deeper context that we are all in. Missing persons. Well, search for the missing persons may help establish that the person is alive and will probably return to life in the society, or establish that the person is no longer alive, which is as probably important for their families, because this allows them to pay homage to that person and to take certain legal actions so the book will certainly raise awareness of other people as to what you can do in these situations. Their author knows very well what he's writing about. Kevin Sullivan, who authored the book, A Country of Missing People, Matthew Holliday, Director, European Programs of the International Commission for Missing Persons. He also heads the Ukrainian program, and Tetyana Melnyk is head of the Kyiv chapter of the Hope Association of the Relatives of Missing Persons. The organization very active in this area. The International Commission for Missing People has started working with Ukraine back in 2014, which is a testimony to the fact that aggression against Ukraine started not 18 months ago. ICMP helped identify the persons perished in MH17 air crash. It provided valuable advice to Ukrainian authority with regard to improving domestic law and mechanisms engaged for search for missing persons. In June this year, I was honored to take part in an online discussion streaming from The Hague, the Netherlands, where ICMP is headquartered, and this public discussion was involved Ukrainian relatives of the missing persons, who all called upon the Ukrainian authorities to create a more effective mechanism to search for the missing persons and support the relatives of the missing persons. They also drew attention to the issue of the kids deported from Ukraine. 20,000 seems like an underestimate. Our heroic ladies also indicated that the families face multiple difficulties when applying the necessary documents. Bureaucracy, vague regulatory provisions. They also, well, complain that in many occasions Ukrainian authorities are not sufficiently active in conducting search for the missing persons. As well, attention was drawn to the slight differences characterizing search for the missing persons from amongst the military and the civilians. This online discussion during this public discussion, Minister of Justice of Ukraine, Mr. Melnyk, referred to the International Commission, and we know that Commission takes great pains in collecting all necessary evidence. The experience and expertise of ICMP is indeed standing head and shoulders over other organizations. So if you wanted to have my opinion, I think that better cooperation with ICMP is very timely, because this will help not only conduct search for the missing person in a more efficient and effective manner, but bring to account the perpetrators. The book highlights many of the issues I have briefly overviewed. The book, as far as I understand, will be available from ICMP site. With this, over to Matthew Holliday, head of the MSP Ukraine program. Sir?
Thank you very much, Andriy, for opening and for introducing me. As Andriy mentioned, ICMP has been working in Ukraine since 2014. Many of its recommendations have been incorporated in measures to address the issue of missing persons, including the law on the legal status of persons gone missing in special circumstances. In April of last year, the authorities asked ICMP to expand its assistance as quickly as possible. We deployed staff to Ukraine in spring of 2022, and in July of last year we opened an office here in Kyiv. And we are now laying the groundwork for a comprehensive program in country. I'd like to emphasize that ICMP's mandate is to help governments locate missing persons as a result of war, disasters, and other causes. We are a treaty-based international organization. I stress and underline the fact we are not an NGO or non-governmental organization. And we are not humanitarian. ICMP is first and foremost a rule of law organization that emphasizes the justice and accountability aspects of the issue of missing persons. Our role in Ukraine is to recommend ways of filling gaps in the existing framework and to provide practical assistance so that the authorities can do this. For example, we will very, very soon begin collecting data, including genetic data, from thousands of families of the missing who are refugees in other European countries. And with the permission of those families, we will share that data with the authorities, and this will help facilitate DNA-based identifications in Ukraine. Another example of our assistance, we are providing technical forensic help to the authorities to assist in identifying especially complex cases of unidentified human remains. We're talking about highly complex cases that are fragmented, highly burnt, very, very difficult to resolve. And we're doing this only upon the order of either the investigator or the prosecutor. Before I turn to Kevin Sullivan's book, I'd just like to acknowledge and note the fact that ICMP's Ukraine program is supported by the European Union, the US, Canada, and Germany. And we also have the political support of the Kingdom of the Netherlands and other ICMP treaty members, not only the Kingdom of the Netherlands, but also the UK, Sweden, and others. Kevin's book, A Country of Missing People, I think it's a real, if I may, a tour de force in terms of how it portrays the issue of missing persons now, and in terms of what could and possibly should be done to ensure an effective missing persons strategy that can secure truth and justice for large numbers of families of the missing. It examines DNA-led strategies that have made it possible in other countries around the world to identify many, many thousands of missing persons. At the same time, A Country of Missing People also acknowledges the important efforts that are being made and have been made by the authorities in Ukraine. It's really remarkable that even in the midst of conflict, in the midst of the Russian aggression on Ukraine, the authorities are endeavoring to establish and refine an effective process to account for the missing. I think noteworthy especially is in May of this year, the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine launched the Unified Register on Missing Persons. I think this is a landmark achievement, and it's certainly a significant step towards developing a secure system of collecting and sharing information by which missing persons can be located and accurately identified. A Country of Missing People highlights the rights of families. And families of the missing are absolutely crucial to any effective missing persons process. It shows how families around the world have accessed their rights and gives pointers, I believe, to families of the missing here in Ukraine as to how they can better access their rights to truth, to justice, to reparations. For its part, ICMP has held extensive consultations with various Ukrainian ministries and institutions with a view to helping them to fulfill their human rights obligations to the families. And I think it's important to stress that under international law and Ukrainian law, for example, families of the missing have the right to the truth about the fate and whereabouts of their disappeared family members and the circumstances in which they disappeared or went missing. And the families also have the right to an effective and official investigation into the fate and whereabouts of their missing relatives that is not only capable of establishing the facts, but also potentially holding the perpetrators accountable. A major component of ICMP's work and our program in Ukraine is to ensure that families of the missing can engage effectively with the authorities, so that by working one with another, the families and the authorities can secure truth and justice. I'm particularly pleased and honored that we're joined today by Tetyana Melnyk, She is the head of the Kyiv branch of the Nadia Family Association. And Tetyana, I'd like to give you the floor now. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Пані Тетяно, будь ласка.
Yes, we are indebted to Kevin Sullivan for authoring this book and for his attention to our issues. I represent the families of those who joined those Ukrainians who had to defeat Ukraine back in 2014, the volunteers or members of the military. Few people at that time imagined what would await them. Many believed that the developments there were of local nature, but there were others who had foresight enough to say what was coming our way. This is my relative lecturer at National Economic University who in 54 years of age he volunteered to serve in Donbass battalion, but later the tragedy of Ilovaisk happened. A few people couldn't understand why he was doing that. They said there's army, there's National Guard, but if more people could understand his motives, the war would have probably ended much earlier or never started. In Kevin's book, we can see cases of the members of our organization, our head, Ludwiga Zinska, her son, served in the Marines, but later on his battalion was sent to Ilovaisk, and his mother completed, as it were, all circles of inferno searching for his son. She organized collection of data for the members of 93rd Brigade. She interviewed possible witnesses, and she compiled a list of persons who could have been exchanged for the prisoners of war. Unfortunately, in 2015, political will was lacking to initiate this exchange, and then her trials and tribulations started when she wanted to commission forensic examinations, and therefore we are so indebted to the commission. We have DNA examinations that do not indicate, well, that DNA is matching, but some other aspects don't. My father, who is 85, is still waiting for their son, because DNA, as important as it is, other examinations might be needed in order to establish with 100% or almost 100% certainty the remnants of a person. There are over 150 families in our association, Hope Dnipro, Hope Lutsk, Hope Libid, and families, members of this chapters help each other we give advice, financial help, whatever we can. And in all these years, there were international organizations that help us, the Red Cross Confederation, embassies, and now the International Commission is going to be involved. In 2015-2016, the authorities were saying, okay, let's first release our POWs and then we'll get back to you. Then Law 2505 on persons missing under special circumstances. We call on authorities to give effect to the law as soon as possible. It was passed in 2018 and, amongst other things, and provided for the Unified Register, for a special commission. But despite our numerous visits to the parliament, to the presidential offices and others, it was only on April 2019 that the first composition of that commission was voted for, but it never started its proceedings. Next time that a vote was taken on the members of the commission was December 2020. The chairperson was elected, but the commission yet again couldn't start working because of various often deplorable reasons. With the full-scale invasion, head of the commission went to the front because he was a member of the military, and a special office for the commissioner for the missing persons was created, but later dismantled. What I'm saying is that many years the responsibility was shifted to various institutions, but the effect was very little. Now that there is a special coordination council, headquarters as it were, we hope things will. More recently, however, some officials tell us that it is not time to do something about your relatives, those who are missing persons, because the law, the new law, creates a definition of a person missing under special circumstances that this official commission has no mandate to investigate into. Well, I have many friends who lost their family members in 2022, 2023. We are interested in helping them, but what I'm saying is that public at large tends to forget about those who went missing before the 2020, before the full-scale invasion. And one other remark. I met Matthew and ICMP about a year ago, and whenever we visit our authorities, we insist that independent forensic examination should be admissible. I'm talking about DNA material, but far as I understand, Ukraine is yet to sign MNOU with the Commission. In the process. So before such an agreement is made, a memorandum is signed, and the process was started already a year ago. We cannot go to the ICMP for a finding that the examinations done in 2014 were of adequate quality. Despite all the troubles, we don't stop. We move forward. We are hopeful that the situation will improve, that things will be tidied up, and our boys will return. Not all of them. We're quite aware of this sad circumstance. What we don't want to see is that people who are alive and somewhere held in custody and captivity are not believed irreversibly missing. We have no access to those places of custody, especially in the temporarily occupied territories, and therefore we hope that the book of today will help us succeed in many respects. The book refers to real life stories, tragic stories, and we will work with anyone who is willing to help us. We will stand to the very end. That's what the relatives, members of my association, asked me to convey to you. Thank you, Tetyana. It happened so that I read the book, not an easy reading. Let me reassure you, I can't even imagine how difficult, how hard it was to write the book, because the author is supposed to live through every story he puts into his book. For us to read it. I have a question to ask of Kevin, but I'll defer them until a later time, because he is provident enough and may answer them before I even ask them. Kevin Sullivan, author of A Country of Missing People.
Thank you, Andriy, and thank you, Matthew, but especially thank you to Tetyana. One of the points that is made in A Country of Missing People is that families are the principal stakeholders in this process, and families are the dynamic that will carry the process forward together with partners. This is an important point. It's one that has been demonstrated in other countries where families have come together in order to exercise their rights, to identify their rights, and to exercise their rights. This is a very important part of the process, and I believe that Tetyana has, with her presentation this morning, really spoken to that. As you will have gathered, the book offers an overview of the issue of missing persons in Ukraine. The objective was to provide a document that would be accessible, that would provide practical information on the process, which would, as much as possible, describe the scale of the process, the scale of the challenge, and the practical steps that have to be taken in order to meet the challenge. The challenge itself is complex. It involves social, economic, cultural, institutional, legislative issues. All of these are part of the process of accounting for missing persons. The book examines the different contexts in which people have gone missing, and this is something where the scenarios have a great bearing on the capacity to address the issue. For example, in the occupied territories, there are clearly limitations on what can be done, and also on gathering information. Likewise, military casualties are an area where information is closely guarded. And then there are the disappearances that have occurred in the huge Ukrainian diaspora, particularly in the months after the invasion, which is something that ICMP, as Matthew mentioned, will begin to address with its new outreach campaign. What the book also does is to look at the existing capacity in Ukraine to account for missing persons. And I should emphasize that there are areas where the capacity is very advanced. There are other areas where it has to be developed. But the overriding message that emerged in the research for this book is that the key is to coordinate the many agencies that are involved in the process. And as I mentioned, the book looks at how family associations and civil society as a whole can become active and effective in the process of accounting for the missing in Ukraine. One of the things that surprised me when I was researching the book is the degree to which Ukraine is a digitalized society. In other countries where ICMP works, people's approach to mobile phones, to social media, to the internet, to anything that's digital is quite diverse. And often people are reluctant to use the latest digital technology in order to engage, for example, with the authorities or to report a missing person. In Ukraine, it's the opposite. People are more comfortable than in other areas where ICMP works. This may seem like a small detail, but it's actually very, very important, because part of a successful missing persons process is to gather information efficiently in a timely manner and to share that information and to have it all in one place so that investigators can have access to the information. It isn't yet the case in Ukraine, but it could be, and one of the reasons that it could be done quickly is because Ukraine is already so advanced in terms of digital communication. Another thing which is an important theme which Matthew has referred to, and which I think is borne out in the evidence that's collated in the book, is that an effective missing persons process must be based on the rule of law. One of the reasons this is so central is that by adopting a rule of law strategy, it will be possible eventually to prosecute those who have been responsible for people going missing. This was the case in the former Yugoslavia. It's been the case in other places where ICMP has worked. So it's very important that the process is based on a meticulous legal procedure from locating missing persons, identifying missing persons, and establishing the circumstances in which they went missing. It's equally important to emphasize that establishing such a process takes time, and it takes patience. It also takes resolve, and there is certainly a great deal of resolve in Ukraine today. And as I mentioned, the institutional and legislative framework has to be coordinated with the scientific capacity, and it has to be deployed in conjunction with the principal stakeholders in this process, who are the families of the missing. The object of a country of missing people is that it will serve as a tool. It will be a resource which any stakeholders in the process can use to find information, to establish what is already possible and to begin moving towards the kind of process through which Ukraine can identify the tens of thousands of people who are missing as a result of the invasion. Thank you.
Дуже дякую, Кевіне. Можливо, є запитання щодо того, як я буду використовувати своє право і можливості.
Well, last call for those who want to ask their question. Nadia Yelchenko, Ukrinform. Matthew, you mentioned that you are in the process of laying groundwork for a comprehensive program. Do you have any timelines? Do you understand that the scope of activities is going to be immense, taking into account the number of persons missing?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we're in the process of laying the groundwork for a comprehensive program. We're already providing assistance right now. ICMP's technical forensic experts in archaeology and anthropology have been providing assistance in the examination of very complex cases. As I say, only at the request or under the order of either the prosecutor or the investigator. We are on the eve of the International Day of the Disappeared, the 30th of August. We're also on the eve of launching ICMP's Out of Ukraine data collection effort to collect data and reference samples, as I say, from the many thousands of Ukrainian refugees in Europe that actually have missing relations and relatives in Ukraine as a consequence of the ongoing conflict. These are small steps going forward. There's so much more that ICMP can do. Institutionally, we're moving towards resolving our status in country. We will soon be signing a protocol with the National Police of Ukraine and a memorandum of cooperation with, I hope, the Ministry of Justice and possibly also the Ministry of Health. These will lay the groundwork for recognition by Ukrainian institutions of ICMP, but also lay the groundwork for concrete areas where we can actually cooperate and implement activities with the aim of accurately locating and identifying missing persons. Beyond that, we can resolve further ICMP status, but for now, yes, there's a huge amount of work to be done. Kevin referred to the scale of the issue. At least or more than 25,000 missing persons. We know that the National Police of Ukraine has in excess of 80,000 open investigations. It's vast, and I think Ukraine needs to accept and receive the help of its friends and supporters in this, amongst which the International Commission on Missing Persons. As I say, the scale is vast. This isn't an issue that will be resolved tomorrow, nor next week, nor next month. This will sadly be a multi-year process, but I think with an effective system in place, many, many thousands of missing persons cases can be resolved efficiently, accurately, for the sake of the families, and then we go forward. Thank you.
Ще запитання. У мене є запитання.
Now I have a question I'd like to ask the author, all the more so that before we'd come here, he asked me what I would change in the book. I don't think that I would. This is not my prerogative, but Kevin, what were the biggest doubts as to the contents of the book? Have you maybe now you think that some things shouldn't have been included because they are too painful? What did you say? Microphone.
This is an excellent question because it goes to the heart of an issue which anybody working in the field of missing persons has to address. And the first rule is to do no harm. The people who are the principal stakeholders, the families of the missing, have experienced something which those of us who have not had this experience can only empathize with. We cannot imagine what that would be like. It's therefore important to research the issue as technically and as objectively as possible, but to do that in a sensitive way. So, for example, in terms of one of the challenges, I worked for many years as a foreign correspondent, and I covered conflicts before the conflict in Ukraine. I was always conscious of witnessing other people's difficulties and personal tragedies, and I always felt a responsibility, first of all, to report that accurately, but I sometimes felt guilty as though I were simply reporting somebody else's misfortune. When we spoke to families of the missing in Ukraine, I was with my colleague from ICMP who was taking blood samples for DNA extraction, and I felt as though, in addition to recording the issue and analyzing it, we were actually making a small but important contribution to a solution. So I felt that the activity of ICMP was something that to some extent justified our discussions with people who had been very traumatized. So that's one of the challenges in this kind of exercise. And the overall objective is to provide what will be a useful contribution that can bring some closure to many of these families. I did try to show where missing persons processes have succeeded in other countries, and it's very important to say that what works in Colombia may not work in Mexico, and what works in Mexico may not work in the Middle East, and so on and so forth. So there's no question of simply applying activities or practices that have worked elsewhere in Ukraine. However, it is, I think, valuable to look at how other countries have addressed this issue and have done that successfully. And there is a section in the book that deals with that. And one of the lessons that we've learned universally, as I mentioned at the beginning, is that families of the missing can be powerful when they come together and when they have a specific agenda that they want to take to the government. And Tetyana said how many years it had taken to make the case to the authorities. And I believe when families come together more and more, they will be able to make that case.
Запитання до пані Тетяни. Ми почули від вас, що вам весь час кажуть не на часі, не на часі. І от тепер ви даєте інтерв'ю для, я маю на увазі там і Єдвіга Лозінська, і інші членкині вашої організації, даєте інтерв'ю для книги, в якій міститься поважна критика української влади. Наскільки ви свідомі того, що, можливо, ефект може бути і інший, вам скажуть, а чого це ви пішли до якогось там іноземця і почали про це розповідати?
Ви знаєте, дякую за запитання. Я і моя родина, і наші родини...
Thank you. No. Neither myself nor families members of the association are against the state. No, we can only criticize deficiencies and imperfections in the operation of the relevant authorities. Never had we thought that we would have to tackle that ourselves. We thought that the existing institutions would step in and deliver, but later when we had identified those gaps, It was that we decided to act ourselves, and so we are not against the government, the state. We are for a more effective and coordinated process. Look, there have been a bunch of legislative challenges. We contributed our own draft amendments. Not always have been heard, but the experience we have should certainly come in handy. Starting last year, when I remind my colloquiators that it's taken us 8 years, they won't believe. They say, oh, 8 years? No, this would certainly be shorter in our case. So we have always referred data available to us to the relevant authorities, to the State Security Service, but they were not always responsive, and therefore we decided to come out, to go to the press, to reporters. But the situation has since improved. I think that many people would attribute these successes to you. And I know that people who are great contributors are too humble to recognize their contributions. Matthew and Kevin are probably amongst those people themselves. Anyway, question. Who initiated the publication? The Commission, Kevin himself, or maybe Ukrainians who may have prompted to start writing and making this book ready for publication? No. I asked this question of Matthew, but if he refuses to answer, then Kevin will have to deal with it.
Sullivan wanted to answer this question, but I'll field the question, Andriy. I mean, this was actually a proposal that came from Kevin himself to ICMP, just to get the order in the right direction. It wasn't ICMP approaching Kevin, with whom we've worked with for many years. It was Kevin said, look, I think we need a book that's basically going to map out what the status is now in Ukraine, what can be done, point to various important, very human stories, but also provide recommendations to the authorities going forward as to how it can become more effective in accounting for the missing. Kevin, did I?
No, I think the translation.
Mr. Sullivan approached ICMP with a proposal for a book, A Country of Missing Persons, and ICMP thought this would be a very good idea, so it came from Mr. Sullivan, not from ICMP. Kevin?
But that puts it very well. Precisely the objective was to take ICMP's experience and make it accessible and available, and I hope that that's been achieved.
Kevin, у вас є
Kevin, you wrote some fiction, right? The Longest Winter, about Sarajevo and BIH. Now you do a non-fiction, documentary. Have you been tempted at all to also write a fiction book about Ukraine? Maybe you still are tempted. So why did you prefer the non-fiction? Ну, поки що ні. Художню книгу про війну.
Where that I felt as though it would be possible to communicate the experience of citizens in a city under siege in a novel more effectively than in day-to-day reporting. I was writing 800 words a day about the number of shells coming into Sarajevo, about the number of people being taken to the hospital, and that was actually an occasion, and there were many occasions where I would visit the hospital every evening and find out the casualty figures. And I felt as if people have been reduced to numbers, and my objective in writing a novel was to try and restore the humanity to those numbers. I don't know the situation in Ukraine as well as I did in former Yugoslavia, but I would say that I have studied quite clearly the issue of missing persons in Ukraine, and I know that it is possible to communicate some of the agony in drama and fiction, and of course, famously in the 1970s, the movie Missing was able to raise this issue in Argentina, and there are other examples around the globe. So I would certainly say that I believe that fiction about a conflict needn't be exploitative. It can actually offer insights on that conflict.
Ті, хто прочитає вступ або
Those who read the introduction, the preface to the book, you'd probably learn that Kevin had been to Ukraine before, and so comparing. So this time when you come to Kyiv, did you notice any difference?
Very interested to see the difference after a year. I remember the situation at the beginning of the war in Croatia and the beginning of the war in Bosnia, when there was a tremendous sense of optimism, of resilience, of determination. And after a period, of course, that was tempered by the absolute catastrophe that citizens had to undergo. I was in Ukraine a year ago in September and October. So a year has passed since I did a lot of the research for this book. My sense is that those trends of resilience and resolve have not diminished. But I very much look forward in the remaining days of this visit to learn more and to go into that in more detail. And I certainly hope to be able to visit again many times in the future, and hopefully under circumstances that are better than the ones that apply today.
Дякую. Ще запитання, можливо, є в аудиторії? Немає. У мене є ще запитання.
Well, since the audience has no further questions this point in time, I will go on with mine. First one goes to Kevin. Why this structure? Effective system. Isn't it kind of a misleading? Because when you go on reading, you find out that the system is not as effective than the scale of challenge. So why do you make this kind of positive statement and then show that there are circumstances that make one doubt that everything is so effective?
For that is the book has two objectives. One objective is to offer an overview of the challenge, and the second objective is to offer ways of addressing the challenge. It's something of a hybrid because it very much reflects the perceptions of ICMP and its experience in other parts of the world. And at the same time, it endeavors to give a global view. So it's partly an ICMP view, but it's also a global view. And one of the things that I wanted to emphasize, and this arises directly from the research, is that there are many things that are being done properly in Ukraine. There are many very talented, very determined people who are working under very difficult circumstances to address this issue. And it's important that we don't simply say it doesn't work. There are ways in which it could work much better, and in ways in which those people would get the support that they need that they're not necessarily getting today. So the reason it follows that structure, the book opens with one example of where a missing person was identified through the process, through a DNA-led process. And I believe that's important because what we have to emphasize again and again is that this is possible. People can be identified, they can be located. ICMP has just started a program in Vietnam where they are identifying people who disappeared more than 60 years ago. This is possible to do with a properly organized DNA-led process. So what I wanted to do was show that such a system can work, show the gaps in the Ukrainian system as it stands today, and then look at the steps that can be taken, which is why the book finishes with recommendations, and the recommendations are fairly specific. And those recommendations lay out the steps through which Ukraine could have a more efficient and effective process in a fairly short period of time.
Дуже дякую, пані Тетяно. Надія – це дуже авторитетна громадська.
Tetyana Nadia is a well-reputed NGO quoted on so many occasions in the book. But there are other associations, I'm sure. Do you cooperate with them as well? Microphone. At the time that we were created, there weren't so many associations like ours. Then there was an organization based at Kharkiv, Kharkiv Human Rights Group, Peaceful Shore, another organization. If I recall now, there are many more organizations, and we stay in touch, maintain communication with each and every of those organizations. Yes, we are believers in coalitions. We try to act effectively with all organizations representing the interest of the families of missing persons, both military and civilians. You know that many people went missing from amongst those who lived in the neighborhoods, communities close to the front line, to the contact line. And in our activities, we highlight their stories, their situations. And now, another question to Matthew. How typical would you say, Matthew, publishing is for the Commission? Is that book unique, or you've done publications like that before? Maybe you're looking forward to other publications to be supported by the Commission?
Primarily guides for families of the missing in terms of rights, guides for families on data processing and DNA. I think to an extent, actually, a country of missing people is actually quite unique for ICMP in the sense we have a snapshot of the missing persons process now, as commissioned, or not commissioned, but actually authored by someone external to ICMP, which, and you know, yes, I mean, it is quite unique.
Колеги, якщо запитань із залу немає, то я...
Unless you have any further questions, I will then invite those who are here at the rostrum to make some concluding remarks, after which I will make mine. Tetyana. Well, this is the time when you can say something you wouldn't be happy leaving this press conference without. Well, first of all, I am indeed very grateful for the opportunity to raise this issue on behalf of members of our association. You should, I should probably admit that in the past 18 months, our activity was not so prominent. Our head of our association, the big association, processed several thousand cases of persons missing after 2022, and by doing that she helped find persons who missing after the invasion. We think that it is important to bring this matter to the press, to the media, because we know that after press events like ours today, many official institutions show greater interest in carrying out their effort. Thank you. That's probably one of the most important things, not only for you, but for others like you. Indeed, Ilovaisk was 9 years ago, but today almost 10. We can all recall that few people discussed it in publicly. Well, the official narrative was about the advances of the Ukrainian military. One of the best things about the book, the ICMP and the association, is that they never put things until later time. They all work and talk in real time as things go on. Now, Matthew, your concluding remarks?
I'll be brief. I think that the challenge of the issue of missing persons is enormous, but I think it's not insurmountable. And I truly believe that with a genuine functional partnership between government, families of the missing, and international partners like the ICMP, huge inroads can be made into this issue in terms of accounting for the missing, realizing the rights of the families, and holding perpetrators accountable. But that will only really happen through true partnership between the families, government institutions, and Ukraine's international partners. Thank you.
Дуже дякую. І Кевін Саліван, прикінцеві зауваження.
And Kevin's final remarks.
What Matthew said, the important point is that missing persons can be found, process can be established. It should be based on institutional and legislative measures that will sustain the process. It should involve the families of the missing in a leading role. And it's very important, as Andriy mentioned, and as Tetyana said, that this is part of the Ukrainian public discussion, because this is an issue for every one person who's missing. There are 5 or 10 family members, colleagues, co-workers, neighbors who are affected by that disappearance. So this is an issue that is a very major one for society. Thank you.
Дуже дякую. Колись один мудрий дядько навчав мене.
Once a very wise man told me how I tell a bad book from the good one. He told me, look at the last line. If you see that something about the sun rising from the faraway hills, put it away. But if you find something that touches you in the first line, then go on reading. So now this book is worth reading, every single line of it. Thank you very much for your attention, and glory to Ukraine.
Я забув запитати в організаторів, що можна робити із тими книжками, які ви...
Так, друзі, всім присутнім ми даруємо книжки. Ох, ох,